Hello, welcome to Watercolor Cards. I'm Lisa Christensen. We are going to paint a plaid background and two red and green striped backgrounds for our ABCs of watercolor. We are starting with B and the brush handling and brushwork. And plaids are a fantastic way to start learning how to really use your brush and layering your watercolor. So this is a really fun and simple way that I like to make backgrounds for cards. So come with me. I'm going to show you how to do layering with watercolor, so glazing with your brush handling, and then just some simple cards backgrounds that I think could really work for my practice. I like to paint backgrounds and then make a sentiment. You're going to need an oval tip brush. That is, it's like a flat brush, but it's just an oval sized brush. They're also called filberts. And then a medium round brush. I'm using a liner size 6 brush, but any round brush, small round brush. And then I'm using my Malang watercolor palette, and I will be using the oranges and Payne's gray for the plaid, and I will be using a sap green, hooker's green, and a cad red with alizarin crimson. I'm also cutting my paper down to 4 by 5 1/4 inch, and we'll start with the plaid. We're going to use yellow ochre and then a beautiful orange color, and then we're going to paint on top of that once it dries Payne's gray. I also stamped a sentiment and used a die cut to edge the sentiment to make it look nice. Now that we have our watercolor card panel cut to size, I'm going to mix up a mixture of a red and an orange with a little bit of brown to get a really pretty fall orangey rusty color. And so that is what I'm doing right now. I'm using a little bit of cad red and a little bit of alizarin crimson to neutralize the two reds, and then I will be adding a little bit of that orange together. So I have 3 reds, 2 reds and an orange. And then I'm going to add a little bit of that Payne's gray just to dull it down because I don't want it super bright, vibrant. And I got this perfect rust color, and it's one of my favorites. And so now that we have that nice big puddle, which looks amazing, we are going to just start with yellow ochre, and I'm going to put that a little bit on my palette just to let it drip in. And we're going to start making the plaids. So I start going down, just simple brush strokes, and this is just normal yellow ochre. And I'm leaving enough white space, but I am not too particular. This is just a nice little way to play with your brush strokes and see how even you can get it. It's a great practice. It really helps with getting the right tone. See, if I stop, then I'll get a bump. So I just want to own my lines, and that really helps. Now I'm going to do the same thing and go on the other side because we're making like a gingham type fabric or a plaid fabric, but it starts with gingham, and I always like gingham. It's fun to paint with, or fun to create with when you have plaid. And this is just a fun background. You could do it with any watercolors. You don't have to use the watercolors that I'm using. You could use liquid watercolor too. Now I'm going to do where the white is. That is where I'm going to add my orangey color, and it's going to glaze on top of the yellow, so it's going to make a really pretty background. And again, you just want to like own your brush strokes. Once you start, just own it. And now I'm going to turn my page again. I felt like that one needed a little bit more paint, and I'm going to have to mix some more. So that's what I'm working on. I just want to get a nice big puddle. I thought I had enough, but you never know. And so the one thing that I love about plaids is as long as you get the ratio kind of right, you'll be all right. And then I'll be going again, and again, you're just owning those lines. And it again doesn't have to be perfect if that drives you crazy. It's a very country, like very country, old-fashioned sort of background. I'm not using no rulers to see where my lines space. It's just kind of fun and free, maybe a little more whimsical for some. But now that it's dried, the background, I'm going to go in and use my smaller brush, and with a very thick consistency, I am going to add my Payne's Gray. You can also use indigo. It depends on the brand, and I'm going back and forth. I'm kind of outlining the red stripes and leaving the yellow to pop. It's just fun. This palette is just a lovely palette. It's very buttery and it's one of my favorites. I also don't, it's a background, so I'm not paying particularly all the attention to how perfect my lines are. But back to the palette, it's a beautiful palette. It's one of my favorites. I have been using this palette probably for about 2 years now, off and on with my watercolor cards, and it is well loved. You can tell that I use the wells a lot. I'm going to be sad when a couple pigments go away, but we're not there yet, and it's been a very, very welcome palette in my work. Alright, so now that I got my plaids all done, I can let that dry. You're going to see that I will splatter some gold metallic, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take that gold, and I'm just very gently, while the paint is still a little bit wet, it's going to mix in with that Payne's Gray. It's also pretty thick. It's more of like a milky consistency. So you'll see that I'm dipping in my brush a couple of times to get a lot of gold on there, but that really adds quite a lot of texture. And now I'm just flicking some water onto the page just to let the water run just a little bit. You don't want it too much, but just a little bit. And then once I feel like it's in good shape, I'm just going to let that dry. And then the next thing I have to do is just get my sentiment ready. Just like that, and that's what I'll be working on when that dries. Alright, for the second 2 cards, we are going to use sap green and cadmium red. And the cadmium red is a beautiful Christmas red, and the sap green, hooker's green, is a beautiful green for Christmas. They both work really lovely. I'm using just my simple oval brush, and I am going to go all the way down the page. This is a half a sheet of 9x12 paper that I just tore in half, and I'm just enjoying my process of painting. This is very much a milky consistency. There's not a whole lot on. I'm dipping my brush into the water and then straight into the pigment. I'm not using the palette to mix any of my colors. What you'll see right now is I'm adding gold in between the white space. So I'm leaving the red and the green with some white space, and then that's just me going in with the gold and adding that gold metallic paint. And it is one of my favorite palettes because it does have iridescent colors in the palette. Alright, now I'm going to use a little bit of a bigger brush. The smaller over brush wasn't quite doing what I needed it to do, and a trick that I like to use is I like to have 2 brushes. If I'm using 2 colors, I'll have one brush for one color and one brush for another color. That way I'm not always wasting my pigment when I am trying to clean out my brushes. So just a little tip there. I'm adding that beautiful iridescent gold into the middle of the white space and letting that kind of flow into both the red and the green as it does its thing. It's just so fun, and this is such a mindfulness activity where you can do this and kind of forget about the world for a little bit and just enjoy the process of painting. It's one of my go-tos for card base panels, and I'll paint a whole bunch and then just have them for whenever I need them. And I will clearly use different colors for different occasions, but red and green are perfect for Christmas. And you can see that I am The brush marks are very juicy, so milk-like consistency for all of it. Go big or go home when it comes to this bold background. And then we just add the metallic in between, and it's just so pretty. And this will, because it's on a 9 by 6 piece of watercolor paper, you'll be able to get 2 panels out of it. Alright, so we're going to let that dry, and now it is dry, and I can add some texture to those lines, and half of it is going to have texture and the other half is going to just stay the way it is. But because I'm going to leave it the way. I'm going to start with the full panel, and then I'll cut my panel down to size. So what I'm doing here is I like to do drips. I think it's really fun, and all it is I add a lot of pigment to the top, and then I just let the water kind of go down, and it just gives a nice little organic texture. These are just little ticks, like I almost think of it as fur or cross hatching, or hatching. I guess we're not crossing it, but hatching or ticks. It's just a fun way to add some texture. This one I'm doing stipple. I'm going to add a whole bunch of little dots, and I'm going to be very particular on how thick my paint is. I want to be able to see it, and so I'm adding a lot of pigment to my brush every time because I want it to be thick. Now for this one, I'm just doing little like circles, like almost scribbles, but it makes for a really fun texture and just fun for the background. And again, it's a bit thicker, milk-like consistency. And this is really fun, just to find different ways to add texture to your watercolor. Now, instead of doing ticks vertical, I'm doing it horizontal. And then again, this is like Morse code, so dot dot dash dash dot dot dash dash. You could do that and make it like your own little message. How fun would that be? And I'm going to do that again with the red. Why not, right? Little Morse code there. Who knows what it says? I don't know, but it is super fun to do. And now I'm going to do some more little tick-ticks, kind of cross hatching fur type ones, and they're just fun. And I was having such a fun time with this. I went through the whole bottom and just made really pretty marks. So this, I'm just rolling my brush around just to give it more of an organic look to it. It's not as organic as the drips, but it kind of is the same technique. And I'm going to do the same thing with the green. I'm just rolling my brush, and I'm not really thinking about it, but it sure makes for a nice texture. It's always fun to play with your brush and see what kind of marks you're going to make. And this is why it's so much fun to just kind of doodle play. That's what I'm doing. There's nothing, no real art or science to this part. Just my mind freeing and being clear of whatever, and just being in the total moment of the color. And then I will continue with the green and the red, and if I remember right, I just want little, like, whatever kind of marks that you can think of. This reminds me of the birds that I've been watching. But those marks with feathers and, I don't know, berries, and just very natural, organic marks. And then I'm going to leave that with drips again, because I do love drips. I try not to use drips all the time in my watercolor, but I do. And you can tell that I like to move the watercolor paper all around. And you'll see that it just gives it a nice little look. And now I can cut it into half for watercolor panels, which is what I will do once it dries. And those are the fun textures that we get. So you can, if you don't want textures, you can just leave it the way it is and just stamp something on it. But I had so much fun making textures on those strips that's what happened. Alright, it is dry now, and I'm going to be cutting this and making 2 card panels out of it. I did try one. I didn't mind that one. I just don't love how the sentiment turned out. So that'll be a gift tag. This one and the plaid will become our backgrounds for the watercolor brush handling. So to start with the plaid card, I'm going to take my panel and I'm going to glue it down, and then I'm going to stamp my sentiment. The sentiment that I'm using is Jingle All the Way from Tailored Expressions. It is one of my favorites. It's brand new this year, and I am going to stamp it. Alright, so what I'm doing here is I'm using my Jingle All the Way, and I'm actually going to use the Wishing You a Cozy Christmas sentiment, and I'm going to find out a nice little way where I want it, and then I'm going to stamp it on my toffee cardstock. I'm actually not using a die cut this time, and I want to make sure that I give myself plenty of room, and I am positioning this onto my Misty, which is a fantastic tool for watercolor cards, and I'm making sure that the sentiment itself is like spot on. It's straight, it's not crooked. The last thing I want is a crooked sentiment, so I really take my time and make sure it's like perfect. It looks good. I'm using just a navy ink, like a corn blue or a dark denim type blue, and I'm just going to press it down really well and get that, and it looks pretty good, but I'm going to do one more just because it's toffee cardstock, the dark cardstock, and there we go. That's perfect. And now I can move that aside. I have my sentiment. I'm going to cut that strip down and then just pop it onto the card. I'm using my cutter, and I'm just going to kind of cut it down to the size that I think it needs to be, and that looks perfect to me. So we're ready to put it on our card base, and right there is where I decided to put it, and it's going to be perfect. I really love the plaid with the cozy Christmas. It reminds me of cozy Christmas. Alright, for the card panels that we just did, you know, this is so pretty. It's just a work of art. I am using some sentiments that I already stamped and die cut, and that is the Merriam Bright, and that's with the stamp and the die cut. Both are from Tailored Expressions, and I'm just playing around with the different shapes, and I'm seeing what's gonna work. And I decided that Peace on Earth is gonna work really well for that, and I'm just gonna take some thin pop like adhesive foam tape and just add the foam, the little foam strips to the sentiment and cut it up, so all I see are is my sentiment, and now I can just take that paper off and I have what I think is a perfect card for a friend, for a religious friend. And how pretty is that? I think it's such a nice little piece of artwork for for someone that will really enjoy it. And then I have that one, and this one will get, all I do is I'm going to put it on the card base and put the sentiment on and call it done. And I think that one I'm going to do Peace on Earth as well. And that is it for those cards, and they're just lovely. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video to be worthwhile, please consider subscribing and giving this a big thumbs up. And I'd like to know your comments. Do you make watercolor backgrounds for your cards?